Okay, maybe we can start. Well, so saying good morning or good afternoon, good evening. I'm Emanuele Angelantonio. I'm the director of the NHSBT in the Health and Behavior at the University of Cambridge, and it's a great pleasure to have Amanda Thijsen today to give us a talk about designing and implementation of intervention to improve blood donation safety. And as I say before, there'll be time for questions at the end of the talk. So, well, please then either put your question in the chat or unmute yourself and you can ask a question to Amanda. Amanda, over to you.
Thank you for the introduction. So yes, my name is Amanda Thijsen. I work for the Australian Red Cross Lifeblood, and I'm here to talk about designing and implementing an intervention that we use to improve blood donation safety. Sorry, I'm just trying to click to the next one. It's refusing. Oh, there it is. So yes, a little bit about myself. I work in the donor research team at the Australian Red Cross Lifeblood, and I've worked there for the last 8 years. Our team investigates ways to recruit, motivate, and retain donors and keep them happy and healthy. We are primarily social science researchers in my team with backgrounds in psychology, public health, clinical trials, sociology, and marketing. We have two main streams of research. One focuses on donor behavior with projects looking at improving donor retention after a temporary deferral, mapping emotional experience of donating blood, and understanding the power of word-of-mouth recruitment. Our other focus is on improving donation safety by examining potential long-term health outcomes of frequent blood donation and reducing the risk of adverse events. So this last topic is the one that I'll be discussing today. So this program of work focused on reducing vasovagal reactions in whole blood donors. While blood donation is safe for most people, sometimes adverse events occur for donors. One of the most common adverse events is a vasovagal reaction. This occurs when a donor experiences symptoms such as dizziness, nausea, and faintness. During a vasovagal event, the blood flow to the brain is reduced, causing the donor to feel discomfort and weakness with anxiety, dizziness, and nausea, which can sometimes progress to a loss of consciousness. These reactions are rare, but these reactions do have serious consequences in terms of donor retention. Donors who experience these reactions are less likely to return to donate again, so it's an issue of concern for Lifeblood, and we wanted to work out how we could reduce these reactions from happening. To do this, we use the intervention mapping protocol to gather information and then develop and implement a theoretically informed intervention program. Intervention mapping is a planning framework that provides a systematic process and detailed protocol for step-by-step decision-making for intervention development, implementation, and evaluation. It originated in public health and draws heavily from psychology. It is grounded in community-based participatory research methods to ensure that the intervention matches the needs of the target population and the intervention context. It guides intervention at multiple levels. Intervention mapping has been used to develop health promotion interventions and strategies, and there have been over 1,000 articles published that use this framework. So the intervention mapping uses a comprehensive 6-step approach to intervention development. That includes the needs assessment, which involves establishing a detailed understanding of the problem, the population at risk, and the behavioral and environmental causes and the determinants of these behavioral and environmental conditions. Step 2 looks at preparing matrices of change, which describes the environmental and behavioral and environmental outcomes, creates objectives for change, and the determinants of behavior and environmental causes. Step 3 looks at selecting theory-informed intervention methods and really making practical applications to this. So we really looked at picking the theory out and translating these into practice. Step 4 looks at combining producing program components and materials, which combines the intervention components into a coherent program that uses delivery channels to fit the context. Step 5 looks at planning the program adoption, implementation, and sustainability. So really trying to implement and maintain the program. And finally, step 6 looks at planning the evaluation. So planning both process and outcome evaluations to assess whether the program was implemented effectively and has achieved its goal. So we chose this particular process model as it's very structured and it comes with a lot of guidance on how to go through each step. Because of this structured approach, we were able to engage with stakeholders who are not researchers while developing and implementing this intervention. So we used people who work in clinical services, donor services, marketing. So it was really cohesive to work with everyone together. So I'll now show you how we use this applied intervention mapping process approach to our intervention context. So the first step of the project was to conduct a comprehensive needs assessment to understand the problem and its determinants. We wanted to get a clear and accurate understanding of current prevention practices. So we used a mixture of methods to achieve this. We performed database analysis to understand when reactions were most likely to occur and which donors are at highest risk of experiencing a reaction. To do this, we examined all donation records between August 2012 and August 2014. We also conducted a review of the published literature on the prevention and management of vasovagal reactions. We also interviewed 30 donors who had recently experienced a vasovagal reaction. In these interviews, we explored donor knowledge, attitudes, practices in relation to prevention and management of vasovagal reactions. We also facilitated 2 focus group discussions with blood collection team members to explore their beliefs about factors that impact donor risk of vasovagal reactions and how they manage these things. In our analysis of the donation data, we found that most vasovagal reactions happened mid-donation, around 40% of them, followed by immediately after the donation, which was 27%, followed by needle removal, which was 22%, and needle insertion. We also found that the largest portion of vasovagal reactions occurred during a whole blood donation. 81% of all reactions occurred during a whole blood donation in our data. This is where donors give 500 mL of blood as opposed to a specific blood component such as plasma or platelets. We therefore decided to focus the intervention on whole blood donations. In our literature review, we found that there were 3 main strategies that could be used to reduce vasovagal reactions. These were applied muscle tension, water loading, and distraction. The first strategy, applied muscle tension, involves donors engaging in repeated contractions of the leg and abdominal muscles in order to increase blood pressure. In the second strategy, water loading, donors are instructed to drink 500 mL of water within 30 minutes before donating. In a third strategy, distraction, donors are asked to focus on the non-donating arm. Now that we identified these strategies, we looked at existing Lifeblood materials to understand what information on these strategies was being given to donors. We found that the advice to use applied muscle tension was included in the donor eligibility questionnaire that's completed by the donor at each donation. At the time we evaluated, the donor questionnaire was done on paper. We also found that the information on applied muscle tension was included on a card designed to improve their flow rate during collection, but not to reduce vasovagal reactions. And we did not find any reference to water loading or distraction at that time. When we spoke to our donors in our interviews, we found that donors spoke a lot about preparing for their donation by eating and drinking a lot of water before their donation appointment. None of the interviewed donors actually mentioned applied muscle tension or on-site water loading. When we spoke to staff, they told us that they asked each donor about how they prepared for their donation. They checked whether they had eaten something in the last 3 hours and how much water they had had. They also spoke to the donor about how they can reduce donor risk of having a vasovagal reaction by providing support. But we also found that none of them actually mentioned on-site water loading or applied muscle tension. So taken together, we found that there was a gap in vasovagal reaction prevention practices at the donor center level. We therefore focus our efforts on really looking at what we can do at the donor center. So in the next step of the intervention mapping, we developed the matrices of change. These matrices specify what people should know, think, or do as a result of the intervention. In other words, it transforms the needs assessment, which defines the cause of the problem, into a model that defines what should change to reduce the risk of the problem. We started by defining our main outcome of the intervention, which was to reduce the incidence of vasovagal reactions in whole blood donation. We then developed 14 specific performance objectives that you can see on the slide here. We categorize them based on their location and timing in relation to the blood donation procedure. For example, one of them was that the donor ingests a minimum of 500 mils of fluid in 30 minutes preceding the donation. As a group, we then looked at each performance objective and identified determinants of that specific behavior. For example, for the performance objective focusing on on-site water loading, we identified that the donor needed to be aware of the benefits and risks of water loading, needed to know what water loading is, and also noted the importance of the potential influence of their social environment. We then, for each determinant, we asked the question, what needs to change related to the determinant for donors to do the performance objective? So for this specific performance objective, what needs to change related to awareness of benefit and risk in order for donors to use on-site water loading? The answer to this became our change objective. The donor can list the benefits of water loading prior to donation. And we did this for all our performance objective and determinants. So once we identified all our change objective, we moved on to step 3 of our intervention mapping, in which we selected our theoretical methods and practical applications. For each of our change objective, we selected several theoretical methods that were matched to that specific determinant. For example, one of the determinants we identified of the donor using applied muscle tension was self-efficacy. In order to increase donor self-efficacy, we selected the theoretical model of observational learning/modeling, which was taken from social cognitive theory. Our practical application of this method was to demonstrate to donors how to use applied muscle tension and model the behavior. We had developed a video in which we show a donor using applied muscle tension during his donation. Overall, in our project, we had identified 14 performance objectives that translated to 63 change objectives, and we drew on 18 different theories to change these objectives. So it's quite large with a lot of spreadsheets. Now that we gather all the information in the previous steps, this guided the development of the actual program components and materials to support the intervention. So in this fourth step of the intervention mapping protocol, we focused on developing and testing our intervention materials and finding the best way to implement them into routine blood collection practices. For our intervention, we developed 3 types of materials based on our theoretical methods, and we worked together with copywriters, graphic designers, and video developers to design the materials. We created a detailed overview or a long text document about risk reduction strategies for use before, during, and after donation. It was less than several hundred words and included 4 images. There was a section on preparing for your donation, which focused on feeling rested and eating and drinking before your donation. A section on water loading, distraction, and asking for help if they needed it in the waiting area. A section on identifying vasovagal symptoms and what to do if the donor starts to feel unwell. A section on applied muscle tension and distraction during the donation, and a section on post-donation care. This document is easily adaptable to a web page. We also created a video in which we followed a young male donor through his first whole blood donation. The information was similar to that of the long text, but did not include information on post-donation care to reduce runtime. The video was about 2 minutes in length. We also created a shorter text or instruction card. On the front of it focused on strategies to use during the donation appointment, and on the back, it focused on post-donation care. The strategies listed were the same as the longer text, but it was less detailed and did not include information on what to do before entering the donation center. To make sure that the materials supported the delivery of our intervention and maximize donor uptake of vasovagal reaction risk reduction strategies, we ran a few studies to tailor them further to our context. So first, we tested the materials in terms of message appeal and impact on intention to use vasovagal reaction prevention strategies with donors. We also asked our donors currently We also asked about what donors currently did to reduce their risk of having a vasovagal reaction and their preferred timing of receiving prevention materials. We selected around 1,400 donors from the Australian Red Cross Lifeblood database who had recently given a whole blood donation, and we randomly allocated them to receive one of the 3 materials, and we emailed them an invitation to complete an online survey. A total of 375 responded, which was about 27%. In our analysis, we found that those in the video condition rated the video significantly more appealing than donors in the other two conditions. We found no significant differences between the long or short text. We also found that those in the video condition indicated they would be significantly more likely to use applied muscle tension than those in the other text conditions. Again, no significant differences between the text conditions. But there was no difference in the likelihood of using on-site water loading across the three conditions. When we asked if they would prefer to receive the material, donors who had read the longer text and those who received the video wanted to receive it 2 to 3 days before their donation, while donors who had received the shorter text wanted to receive the material at the donor center. Across all groups, a conversation with a Lifeblood staff member at the center was the most preferred method to receiving information about vasovagal reaction strategies. We therefore adapted the longer text to be a web page and the video to be delivered online. We then wanted to know how these materials would perform in a donor center. We had so far relied on donors' intentions to use risk reduction strategies, but we actually wanted to know if they changed behavior. So to test this, we did an implementation trial to see whether these materials increase the use of applied muscle tension and water loading. We randomly allocated whole blood donors who had an appointment at 2 fixed sites to 4 conditions. The first group received an email link to a video 2 days before their appointment. The second group received the email link with the webpage 2 days before their appointment. The third group received a standard appointment reminder email, also sent 2 days before their appointment, but then they also received the instruction card and accompanying verbal instructions when they were at the donor center during their appointment. And then we had a standard control group who received the standard appointment reminder email, but nothing additional in the center either. All donors were then given an evaluation survey at the end of their donation and refreshments area. So of those randomized, 806 actually presented in the donor center to donate. Of those, 598 were successfully recruited to one of the 4 study groups. The rest were either deferred at interview, declined to participate, or not suitable for other reasons, like they were converted to plasma. So in terms of findings, what did we see? Well, when we asked them whether they received what we sent to them, the results were pretty good, with more than 2/3 in each condition recalling that they had received it in the online groups. However, what was less good was the response when we asked those in the webpage and video condition whether they'd actually engaged with the materials that they'd been sent. Only 10% of those in the video condition had watched the video, and only 26% of those in the webpage condition had clicked on the webpage link provided to them. This low engagement suggests that despite the appeal of these mediums to donors, in reality, there was actually little support for using off-site web-based materials to provide information to donors about preventing vasovagal reactions. When we looked at the actual use of risk reduction strategies, we found that donors who had received the on-site instruction card had the highest rate of engagement at 59% compared to the other 3 groups. But this was not statistically significant from the control group. In terms of applied muscle tension awareness, we found that those in the card condition reported high awareness of applied muscle tension in comparison to those in the control. And of those aware, donors in the card condition reported significantly more use of applied muscle tension than those in the control group. Finally, those in the card condition reported significantly higher future intention to use applied muscle tension than those in the control condition. So, contrary to the survey results, we found that the donor did not engage with the online materials and that only the on-site instruction card was found effective in increasing the use of risk reduction strategies. So, given the finding that in-center approaches were more effective, my next task was to develop supports for staff to actually deliver this intervention to donors. We conducted focus group discussions and a national survey with blood collection staff to understand their knowledge, attitudes, and behaviours with regard to reducing donor risk of vasovagal reactions and their views on how we can communicate risk reduction strategies to donors. Staff told us that one of the biggest barriers to discussing risk reduction strategies is competing activities and the limited time they have to spend with the donor. We also identified a need from staff for local evidence to support the use of applied muscle tension. The combined findings from the focus group and the previous steps aided in the design of materials to support staff. This included an e-learning module to increase their knowledge of risk reduction strategies, a 2-minute demonstration video to show them the strategies, and a 30-minute face-to-face workshop to increase their self-efficacy, knowledge, and awareness of risk reduction strategies, and how to discuss them with donors. So to test the efficacy of the program on reducing vasovagal reactions, we ran another study. We focused on delivering both the staff and the donor materials and trying to optimize the delivery of applied muscle tension. We combined our learnings from the needs assessment, which showed that a large proportion of vasovagal reactions occurred at certain time points, and the timings of when a staff member is with the donor to optimize the delivery of applied muscle tension. So rather than asking the donor to use applied muscle tension from needle in to leaving the donation chair, which lasts for about 12 minutes on average, we wanted to instruct the donor to only use it at strategic time points starting at just before the needle in, before the needle is removed, and before leaving the donation chair. This cuts the time down to 5 minutes of applied muscle tension during the donation. With this approach, we hope to improve donor compliance to applied muscle tension and support staff in their limited time as they have to educate and prompt donors to use applied muscle tension. We ran a 3-arm randomized controlled trial in 5 centres across Australia. The first condition was the standard applied muscle tension procedure from needle in to leaving the donation chair. The second was our strategic time points condition at needle in, needle out, and leaving the chair. And the last condition was our control condition of no applied muscle tension. To ensure that the correct prompts were given by the phlebotomist, we randomly allocated the size to run either the entire donation condition or the time points condition. For our staff education component, at each of these sites, we delivered our on-site education session, the video, and the e-learning module to staff. For our donor education component, a staff member uses an instruction card in both applied muscle tension conditions to educate the donor about risk reduction strategies. Donors were prompted to use water loading in the waiting area and to use applied muscle tension during their donation by staff. So we really had an active component of staff prompting donors during the trial. We targeted donors with a whole blood donation at one of our intervention sites, and the final sample included 734 donors. So in our study, we found that donors who practice applied muscle tension at strategic time points had fewer vasovagal reactions, felt more confident, and more in control compared to donors who did not use applied muscle tension. So specifically, the rate of vasovagal reactions was 1.6% in our strategic time point group and 6.3% in our control group. We then looked at compliance, and we found that 78% of our donors in the strategic time point group and 71% of our entire donation group complied with our applied muscle tension instructions. So we found that our intervention was successful in applying strategies and lowering the rate of vasovagal reactions. So now that we had confirmed our intervention program, the next step of the intervention mapping is to plan for program adoption and implementation and sustainability. So in this project, this involved a lot of internal collaboration to generate a detailed plan for the intervention to be rolled out nationally to reach our target population. We developed a multi-level communication plan, which targeted donors, blood collection teams, and the organization as a whole. A crucial element was to ensure internal stakeholder engagement and to work closely with senior management across all divisions to ensure that the intervention was aligned with other business initiatives. We used a number of strategies to implement the intervention into routine practice. And these included, for example, the distribution of all program materials, where we sent each centre a starter package of all our new materials. So these included the instruction card and some other posters that we would use in the donor centres. We also pushed out the e-learning module to all blood collection staff. Another strategy that we used was called Train the Trainer, in which we use an existing network of skills coaches to deliver the on-site education element to blood collection teams. We trained the skills coaches who in turn trained the blood collection teams. We also used mass media strategies by posting information about risk reduction strategies on Lifeblood social media accounts. And we also mandated the change by ensuring all standard operating procedures were updated and had messages from senior management to communicate the need to educate donors about vasovagal reaction prevention. We also set up a dedicated resource page on the internal employee network for anyone who wished to learn more about the initiative or just wanted access to some of the resources. So we implemented this program of work in January 2018. And the final step of intervention mapping is obviously evaluation. Typically, there are two forms of evaluation. The first is effect evaluation, which assesses whether the health, behavioral, and environmental outcomes change as a result of the intervention. And this is typically done by comparing the group that had the opportunity to participate in the program with the group that did not. The second is process evaluation, and this involves evaluating how the program was implemented and the reason behind its implementation status. It includes reviewing the fidelity and reach of the intervention. The process evaluation can help you make sense of the effect evaluation. And the outcome of step 6 is detailed evaluation plan, which includes the evaluation questions, study design, indicators, measures, and protocol. It also includes a list of the resources you will need to include the evaluation. So in our evaluation, we looked at routinely collected blood donation data to see if we could observe an effect on the incidence of vasovagal reactions. And we also conducted a donor survey before and after implementation to assess donor knowledge, awareness, and use of risk reduction strategies, and whether they received any of the program materials. We also conducted a survey with blood collection staff to investigate their uptake of the intervention and compare these with findings from the survey data that we ran in the needs assessment phase. This figure shows the rate of vasovagal reactions before and after national rollout. The total rate of vasovagal reactions declined from 22.5 per 1,000 donations to 20.6 per 1,000 donations after implementation, which is a reduction of 8%. We further investigated the differences in reactions by using a multivariate logistic regression and found that the odds of experiencing a vasovagal reaction was significantly reduced by 12% after implementation of our intervention. So this was after controlling for age, sex, donor status, and body weight. So fewer people were experiencing vasovagal reactions after implementation of our intervention. So looking at the data we collected in our donor survey, we found significant changes in some of our performance objectives. I highlighted a few here. We saw a significant increase in the use of on-site water loading and use of applied muscle tension. So you can see water loading increased from 64 to 77% and applied muscle tension increased from 20 to 39%, so almost doubling. So all in all, we saw a significant impact of our intervention on increasing the use of risk reduction strategies among donors. So since implementation of the intervention, one of our key objectives as Lifeblood is to sustain the change. And one of the challenges within intervention research is once you've implemented a change, how can we sustain it on the longer term? Our donor care team have been doing some clinical audits of our donor centers to ensure our teams are still using the donor materials and are educating and prompting donors to use these strategies. The findings of these audits are then shared with the donor centers to help them sustain the change. We have also rolled out refresher training to capture any new staff that have come on board, but also as a refresher to all staff to make sure that their knowledge on risk reduction strategies is still up to date. We have also continued posting about risk reduction strategies on our social media accounts, and we have also revised some of the materials to better match the needs of staff and donors. So for example, what started as an A6 size instruction card that was handed out to each donor to be taken home, this was now developed into an A4 size instruction sheet, with some centers having laminated them for reuse. We have also implemented stickers to serve as visual reminders on the donation floor for both donors and staff to use applied muscle tension. So this intervention keeps developing as time goes on. So hopefully today I've given you a little bit of an idea of how we developed, implemented, and evaluated an intervention to improve blood donation safety at Lifeblood. Our program was successful in reducing vasovagal reactions, and we found that intervention mapping was a great tool to use as a theory-informed intervention in a systematic approach. One of the challenges in working at a blood collection agency is that donor centers are complex environments and changes to standard practice happen often. We found that pilot testing and working with different levels of the organization was essential to developing our intervention. And if you'd like to know more about any of the studies that I talked about, a lot of it has been published in the recent years, so I've included the references here. But also feel free to send me an email if you'd like to know anything else. I think that's it.
Excellent. Well, thanks a lot, Amanda. Really fascinating talk and a lot of information that they're giving us. So time for a few questions. So there's a question on the chat from Rekha. Do you want to read that, Rekha, or? It's really about whether or not age and gender data were collected for the Vasovagal events, I guess, for the intervention study, I guess.
I'm not sure which one, but yes, we do tend to typically collect age and gender and always control for that in our analysis.
Good, excellent. And Lorna, there's a question from...
You know, I mean, I think that was really fascinating in terms of the way that donors wanted information shared with them, and the fact that if you sent stuff out to people in advance that they didn't actually look at it. And I suppose I was thinking about that in the wider context of consent generally. I mean, these are intervention, sort of mitigation interventions, but in terms of when we can take consent from donors, certainly, obviously you're in Australia, but in the UK, we've had the Montgomery ruling, and it's about making sure that we give the donors all the information that they might consider important. And you know, we've been thinking about when in the journey do we give the donors that information, and kind of what you're suggesting there is if we give it to them before, they probably won't look at it, and it really needs to be on session. But so, you know, have you got any kind of suggestions for managing the sort of challenges of time around that? And I mean, really, I suppose informed consent is about having time to read and reflect, whereas when on session, that's really challenging.
Yes, it is a challenge, and we see it in other areas of work that we are in as well, in terms of iron, for example, as well, and also in terms of adverse events. I think it is good to still send out information beforehand for those who will read it. There are still those that engage. There were 60% of donors that still opened the email and actually looked at it. However, I do think that really on-site support and actually re-emphasizing and having that conversation to inform donors about the risks of donating blood, but also making sure that they have that informed consent conversation. So I think it's a bit of an approach on both ends. So sending out beforehand, but really reinforcing that conversation at the center. I hope that answers your question, Lorna.
Yeah, thank you.
Excellent, thanks. There are a few questions on the chat, but just a question from me. So you mentioned about the AMT results, comparing the, you know, the time, specific time AMT versus the overall AMT, and then in some way the control group and the reduction. Is it the similar reduction as well when you compare the time specific AMT versus the non-time specific AMT, or is it only when you compare the time specific versus the control group?
So we only compared it to the control group for both conditions. We did not find a significant effect of the AMT applied during the entire condition versus the control group. So we only found an effect of the strategic time points.
But you haven't compared the strategic time point versus
No, we did not do that. No, that was not what our approach was. It was purely looking at the control.
Excellent.
But yeah.
So the few other question, I don't know if you want to read them. So Andy Bush about the applied marginal tension in UK. Yes, I can answer that. I guess it is applying in UK, so it's recommended as one of the intervention. And you're actually testing that a slightly different intervention of AMT in the STRIDE trial. There's a UK study to assess, NHSBT study to assess different intervention for vasovagal reaction. There's another question from Derek about the time frame from intervention mapping from inception step 1 to completion step 6. I think what was the time frame for that?
It was quite long, I will admit. That's one of the downfalls of intervention mapping. We took about 3 years doing it all. So that was including all the multiple testing, doing the needs assessment, and then all the way through to evaluation. So yeah, it is a very long-term process. However, we did want to do it in a systematic approach, and with multiple rounds of testing in between as well, to make sure that the pilot testing we found was very crucial, just to be able to adapt the materials continuously. Because if we'd started out with our initial approach, which was very wet-based, we would have ended up with an intervention that was not as effective. So the intervention mapping very helpful, but it does take a while to get through it all.
Thanks. And then there's another question from Reka about whether or not there was an increase or decrease in events looking at age and gender of donors. So whether or not there's a correlation between vasovagal events and age and gender, I guess.
Is this for the implementation piece, or was that the trial? Sorry, there were multiple studies.
Yeah, Reka, would you be able to clarify that?
Just wanted to ask you, did you find that there was an increase of vasovagal events in the younger generation as compared to the older one? Or did you use special measures for the younger ones? Did you have a divide? I mean, did you have an age and gender divide where you could say one or the other had more events?
Is this for the implementation phase?
Yes, please.
Yes. So we only looked at donor status. So we looked at first-time donors versus repeat donors, and we found that it had an effect in both groups. However, in all of our analysis, we did check control for age and gender. So we found that there was an overall effect of just the intervention itself, and it had nothing to do with age or gender. But we did not specifically look at whether it only worked in females versus males or younger donors versus older donors.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry, I had a problem with my computer. I wasn't able to unmute myself. So there's a few other questions from Ken. Ken, do you want to read it up? Is it really about where did you find, why were you disappointed with the results, given the hard work was involved?
I was absolutely not disappointed with the results, because we did find a significant effect in vasovagal reactions. Obviously, working in donor centers and with donors, staff, there's a lot of changes happening. So seeing a small reduction was still seen as a success, because looking at some of the compliance, we're still working on that, trying to increase that. So there's still more room for improvement. What we did see an effect of the intervention in general. So still happy.
Excellent. And then Stephen, so saying your results seem to suggest potential substantial difference in intervention effect between on-site versus off-site VVRs. What could be the rationale for such difference?
Donors being, I think he's referring to the paper, which I didn't discuss. So in the trial, we also found that donors who had had reduced delayed reactions compared to on-site reactions. And the reason for that, we think, might be that donors are better prepared. They are more psychologically engaged as well. However, this is just speculation. We haven't really tested for that, or were powered to detect any differences in there. So I guess that's just speculation, that donors who had a better donation procedure, were more hydrated, had less delayed reactions.
Excellent. No, thanks a lot. Any additional question for Amanda? For your information, Sarah, I've put in the chat a few other links for other talks from about donor health from our BTRU, and as well from links to study that we are running about vasovagal reaction. But Amanda, many thanks for this excellent talks. Very interesting and really stimulating, and then as well about really seeing the process from setting out the question to implementation. Is really a long journey, but it's actually, I think it's really worth it, because you actually see things that will be implemented, are implemented, and are effective. So really, really well done. Thanks a lot for joining us. It's for your evening, for our morning, and it's really excellent start of the week for us. I hope it's a good end of the day for you as well.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
Excellent. Thanks a lot. And thanks for joining. I hope to see you all for the next BTRU seminar. Thanks a lot.